success in finding some things.
Yeah, pretty good. I read this whole book called Education in Alaska's Past, which was a book put out by the Alaska Historical Society on, I guess it's taken from a conference that was held where a bunch of people came and delivered a paper or an article.
Do you have a copy of it?
Not with me. I have it out in my car. Maybe I
How
can
long
grab
ago
it
was
up.
it written?
I'm not sure, but Bill Demmert was there, and there was a paper by him in the book, and a few other people. And what it was some of them gave talks on the origins of education in Alaska. Some of them talked about, some people took an individual community and gave a whole 100 years synopsis of what education, how it was slowly transformed, and those were really valuable. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Was that part of a series that was done in Canada?
I think
in about 1970, early 71?
No, much later than that. I think it was just delivered in 82. This was in Valdez, I think. Are you familiar with it? I'll show you it, and I'm sure that you've heard of it. In fact, there was one reference to you in it. Someone referenced a major court case, Tollbuck versus
Lynn. Okay.
So anyway, but I got a lot out of that. But let me read you what I wrote.
That's real good. Glad you found something.
Yeah, it really gave me some
You got
direction.
it here? The library?
The book? I have it in my car. I'll drop it off to you after we finish.
Well, where'd you get it?
Oh, from the library. Yeah. Okay. But okay. So what I want to say first is that my research throughout the week led to a reinforcement of the patterns that you mentioned last week that you thought were important elements in the shaping of education in Alaska, namely the treatment of indigenous languages by educators, the relationship of types of education formed in accordance with the amount of adolescents' presence in the community, and the oscillation of a formal approach and an informal significant others involved in the process, as well as the agreed conclusions of those involved in decisions as to what the aim of their education was. Okay, so
sounds pretty sophisticated.
Well,
is that what came out of our discussion last week?
That's what you came up out of the top of your head last week. I listened to it again and narrowed it down, and that's pretty much.
It might have been one of my better days.
Okay. So you also made a statement toward the end that you said something like, we must be talking about rural education here in this project. But it's on that point that I want to make a couple of major statements that I think will set forth a more conscious structure to our talks. Okay. I believe that as we start to contemplate the above-mentioned categories, those categories that you came up with last week and which were reinforced by my research, into the establishment of the patterns of education in Alaska, we must proceed along three simultaneous lines. So, looking at each category in respect to these three lines. The first line being rural education, the second being non-rural, or in other words, public schools in Juneau, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Ketchikan, and Sitka, and thirdly, private school education. And I believe that these are the very separate components in Alaska, and today I want you to define each of these: private schools, rural and non-rural. Define what they mean. And I'd also like to make another major statement which I deem the basis for our future talks, and that's that the patterns of education are shaped by community resources utilized in transferring aspects of culture, of civilization, of the culture of civilization to mankind. So it's shaped by the resources that are being used in order to transfer what people think is civilized or whatever they're trying to educate. So in each of the three lines of development of education in this state, there are very perceptible differences in what resources are utilized in shaping education. It's the very choices made by the people involved between the resources they would allow to enter in and those that physical environs hindered or philosophically they chose to neglect. So first of all, Marshall, I want you to define what rural education, non-rural, and private is, the factors you believe that make them different, and then let's decide how the different resources they use shape certain things. All this will set the stage for a chronological study of the history of education in Alaska and the decisions made by key people or the populace or the government in defining the resources they prepared for use in the school setting. So out of all that, maybe you could start by saying some things about what's the difference between private, rural, and non-rural.
You got lots of area to cover.
Yeah.
In those three questions. First of all, the easiest way I think to distinguish between the private and the rural and the non-rural schools. The private schools, in my view, are those that are, first of all, recognized as private schools by law, that they exist for a purpose of education that is supported by the church or through a separate set of funding that doesn't come through the state. We have a category of school called private denominational. There's a separate body of law that recognizes those schools in the state. They have to do certain things as far as certificated teachers having 180 days of school, and they have other requirements to meet. There's another category of schools which is normally not thought of as a private school, but in essence it is a private school. That's the Bureau of Indian Affairs school. And they have that private status in that they are funded through the federal government and funded as a result of the degree of Alaska Native blood that the students have. And other non-Native students may attend, but the money to operate the schools is generated by students with 1/4 or more Native blood. So in addition to the way the money is obtained, the BIA schools are exempt from any of the other requirements of state government. So in essence, we've kind of looked at them as private because there's no way to funnel money to them from, through this, as far as the state is concerned, to operate schools. They have a separate governance structure, and they're set up to primarily to provide a service for just one segment of the population. And that segment also has a choice of either going to that school or going to a public school, just as students have the choice of going to a private or denominational school and a public school. The differentiation that exists as far as rural and non-rural has been one of debate for a long time. What's rural and what isn't? The easiest way probably to sort that out is to, first of all, take all the schools that are in the unorganized borough and if you were to take all of the communities or all of the schools that are in the unorganized borough, you would have the majority of what I think people would agree are the rural schools. However, that isn't all of them, because there are some of such as the North Slope Borough and the Kodiak Borough, that, for example, and Kenai Borough, that have isolated communities in those boroughs that are very rural, as well as a smattering of first-class cities that are very small first-class cities that came into existence as first-class city school districts prior to the time the change was made regarding how many people are necessary in the way of numbers before they're eligible for first-class charter status. Places like St. Mary's and Hoonah and Pelican and Heidelberg are considered rural, I think, by most anybody's definition, but yet they're not a part of the unorganized borough as I've used it earlier. But that's primarily what I'm talking about. And, you know, I don't know what that population figure is. If you say all communities of 2,000 or more are non-rural, that's an area of you could kick that around all day. But I think that all the schools in the unorganized borough, plus probably a half a dozen of the first-class cities, are definitely rural. So, in our discussion, I think mostly what we've been talking about has to do with education in this so-called rural area. I think we need to be careful not to exclude some of the historical aspects of education in places such as the oldest first-class city school district in the state, Nome. Nome Public School System, I think, is one of the first public school systems in Alaska.
I didn't know that.
It goes back to the very early 1900s. It's also interesting to know that places such as Juneau had a dual school system. They had the native schools and the non-native schools. Up until, I think, maybe early 40s. Two separate physical locations. Sitka had the same thing. A number of communities apparently had that situation, but I know Juneau and Sitka did. There was one building for native youngsters and another building for non-native youngsters. In your research, I think you'll find that.
Yeah.
That's an important part because it isn't all that many years ago. And it's almost like we carried a piece of that with us with Mount Edgecombe. Mount Edgecombe was a native school, and that was in operation until 2 years ago. Different reasons, supposedly, for the continuation of Mount Edgecombe as a separate school versus an integration of those students into other high schools. But, you know, also, it's kind of interesting when you think about it that there's probably it's the only one in the state like that. There are other, Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding schools elsewhere in the country. I don't know how many there are in a physical location where there are other public schools available, right in the same town. That was the case down at Salem, Oregon with Chemawa, Oregon. There's a boarding school there, an Indian boarding school. But the students coming there are from all over the country, not just from Oregon. In fact, my guess is that the majority of them are from probably from states other than Oregon. I don't know that, but that's for a fact. So, those are some of the descriptors that they would use in defining the rural, non-rural, and private. Now, you had a third part to that on the rural, non-rural, third aspect of your question.
Well, what I was going to go, and then from that, I think that was necessary to define that in order to see how their different resources are available to each of these different categories of education, and by the resources at their disposal, they shaped education in certain ways, like Juneau being very much in the center of commerce at the time, or Sitka in the development of education. There was more resources of the lower 48's culture, so to speak. But whereas up in north, in some place like Circle City, they were trying to, they were struggling in order to keep the place warm, in order, and they had just a few books, where that type of thing, and that certainly shaped what was available in education for the people there. So that, so what I wanted to focus on today was, I wanted to hear from you about how important you think different resources are, and how people have used any kind of resource, whether it be from the local community, using the local community's culture as a resource, or the local community's language, and for bilingual type interactions, or using people traveling up from the south for teachers. When Sheldon Jackson traveled to a number of places and to organize things, or whether there was just a teacher stuck out in the bush for 20 years off by themselves with no one overlooking them, and that kind of thing.
Well, I think you got quite a range of situations where a variety of resources have been used. I think that if you were to look at the results of, or take a look at a couple of places, let's say you were to, in your research, if you were to take a couple of selected villages that are given treatment in any of the written material, so that you could read, you could follow some of it through what you read. You would find several resources that play a part. And the reason I'm suggesting this is the speech.
Sure.
Hello? Yeah, speaking. Yeah. Good. How about you? Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago? What time did you try to get on? Okay. Okay, I canceled it fairly early because of the difficulties people were having coming on. And I think I was on with one person and said, took care of the business of that individual, and told the operator to cancel it out. We're going to be on here at 4. You got the number, same one that you just gave me, and we'll, let's give her a try and see if it works. Haven't seen it. No, don't have it. Okay, maybe in the mail somewhere. Haven't seen it yet. Yeah, 11120. Yeah, Glacier Highway. Yep. Yeah, okay then. See you bet, bye. If you can find a couple of villages that are identified in any of the literature, like White Mountain is referred to quite a bit. White Mountain had a boarding school. White Mountain had a vocational school. VIA was involved. They pulled out in like the late 1940s, early 1950s. Places like Shagluk, maybe Antioch or McGrath. Any communities that where there seems to be some reference made in the literature, maybe some in southeastern Handgun, Metlakatla, think we will find that some of the resources will show that there have been local people who've gone out to school, come back, have taken positions in the community, and have played a key role as a resource, either directly teaching or being used as a guide for some of the educational programs in those communities. You'll also find that in some of the locations the church has been a very rich resource in a number of the communities. That there have been some type of and long-standing and active local tribal council, IRA councils, for example, or very active village councils that have also played a role.
What's an IRA council?
It's an Indian Reorganization Act structure that took place in like the late 30s and set up a form of governance in the community. You might also look to see if any reference has been made to the local National Guard organization. This goes back to World War II, where the scout battalions played a key role in not only the defense of the nation, the state, but also served as a gathering point for some of the young leaders of the communities. They then served as a form of resource to the educational program. What I'm shooting at is you will see a pattern emerge of certain things that recognized or that helped certain communities to be recognized. I'm convinced that if one were to trace some of those, you would also find that as a result of these different activities, different groups of people, they would be identified as resources for the school. You would also see where they have made a definite contribution to the formation of a strong school in those communities. Now, these are organizations, gatherings of people, events that have probably taken place in some of rural Alaska, which we normally don't attribute to direct school. Follow me? Certainly the church is spoken of very often in some of the earlier literature.
Absolutely, because it was like that's the only thing they had as a resource was these missionaries and the
Right.
hierarchy from the missionaries saying just go and teach, and whatever they defined as teaching, they would teach, and mainly it was giving transcribing the Bible and things like that.
The other resources, I need to think a little bit about that. This is just a, off the top of my head thought that as you go through some of that stuff, you see if you can identify any of them. And maybe there's not enough there. Maybe there isn't enough there to be of value to us. But on the other hand, there could be. You might see some patterns emerging. As you mentioned the case, an example of somebody tracing the history of a community for the past 100 years. What were some of the significant things that were mentioned during that chronology of the events in that community over the past 100 years? Was there a great influence by the church? Did there appear to be some very active governance structure such as an IRA council or tribal council? Did there appear to be a significant role that those people played in such things as national defense through the National Guard? Was there any other significant event that took place in that particular location where the local people credited with finding or being responsible for the mining development of that particular region? What might have brought certain kinds of economic things from the economic development kinds of activities whaling, for example, or mining, or some specialized hunting, resource harvesting of a variety of types in that particular location, that then is utilized, that activity then is utilized in a way that really kind of serves as a resource to the school. I think you find some things like that. Is that what you had in mind? I mean, is that kind of on the track?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll look at that more and begin to.
You could be buried over there in that library from now till you're ready for Social Security benefits.
Well, we'll try to have some kind of direction where we make some conclusions to unbury myself.
I think you're getting some focus on it.
You think I've got some focus since last time?
Yeah. You bet. Yeah, it's good. Real good.
And we'll begin to use what you said today into those specific categories mentioned last week then.
Yeah, see if there's anything to that. Maybe we'll have to do a total rethinking of it after you search a little bit more. But apparently some of the direction that we outlined is substantiated on the basis of what you've read and what you've had a chance to look at. Is that not true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
One more thing.
Yeah.
Did you find the name of that film out that you told me about last week? You said there was some film made that was in an interview with him.
Yeah.
Look into that and.
I forgot all about it. It's called, I know that Lost River is
Well, anything else to say in conclusion? I know that you have to go
no, I
right into
can't think of
conference.
anything right now, Timothy.
Okay.
I've got to switch gears here and get over on an audio conference with students.
Okay, well, I think there was some success.